You won't believe what happened to these unsuspecting visitors. They thought they were just going on an ordinary trip, exploring old places or hiking through familiar woods. But what they didn't know was that they were about to face something far darker than they could ever imagine. The terrifying truth behind these places has been hidden for years, and now the spirits that haunt them are calling out to anyone who dares to listen. From a cursed excursion that no one could escape, to a haunted mansion with a deadly secret, a mysterious lake that holds more than just water, and an abyss that swallows anyone who falls into it. These stories are more than just tales, they're the last warnings of those who never made it back. Stay with us until the end, because you won't be prepared for the chilling twists that await. Cursed excursion. The small coastal town of Westbridge had always been a popular destination for tourists, especially during the summer months. The picturesque streets, the charming old town square, and the breathtaking views of the sea were enough to attract visitors from all over the country. But as much as the town seemed idyllic, there was a place no one ever spoke about, a place that people whispered about in hushed tones: the old church on the outskirts of town. It was an ancient, crumbling building, abandoned for as long as anyone could remember. The locals said it was cursed, that strange things had happened there long ago. No one dared venture near it, and those who did never returned the same. One day, the school in Westbridge announced a field trip to explore the old church. The students were excited, unaware of the dark history behind the place. Among the group was Anna, a curious, cautious girl, and her best friend, Lily, who was always eager for an adventure. When the class arrived at the church, it looked even more imposing up close. Its once grand stone walls were now covered in creeping vines, and the door was barely hanging on its hinges. The atmosphere around the place was thick with an eerie silence. "All right, kids," their teacher, Mr. Edwards, said, "we'll be exploring the grounds, but stay together and don't go inside. The church is unstable, and we don't want any accidents." Anna, however, couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. She had heard the stories how the church was said to be cursed, how the people who had lived there long ago had vanished without a trace. But Lily, full of excitement, wasn't deterred. "Let's go inside," she whispered to Anna. "It's just an old building. What's the worst that could happen?" Reluctantly, Anna agreed. They snuck away from the group and pushed the door open, stepping into the darkness of the church. The air was stale and musty, and the dim light filtering through the broken windows only made the place feel more oppressive. As they moved deeper into the church, they noticed strange symbols carved into the walls, symbols that seemed to shift when they weren't looking directly at them. The floor creaked under their feet, and the sound echoed through the empty space. "I don't like this," Anna said, her voice trembling. "We should go back." But Lily was already moving toward the altar at the far end of the church. The closer they got, the more Anna felt a sense of dread settle over her. Something was wrong, something that went beyond just the spooky atmosphere of an old building. Suddenly, the air grew colder, and Anna felt an icy chill run down her spine. She turned to Lily, but her friend was no longer standing where she had been. In fact, Lily was nowhere to be seen. "Hello," Anna called out, her voice barely above a whisper. "Lily." There was no response, only silence, thick and suffocating. Panic surged through Anna as she ran through the darkened church, calling Lily's name. She searched every corner, but her friend was gone. Then, out of the corner of her eye, she saw a figure standing by the altar. It was a tall man, dressed in old-fashioned clothes, with a face that was pale and gaunt. His eyes were hollow black pits, and he was staring directly at Anna. Frozen in place, Anna couldn't move, couldn't speak. The man slowly raised a hand, and Anna could feel a powerful force pulling her toward him. She tried to scream, but no sound escaped her mouth. The figure reached out, his cold fingers brushing against her arm, and suddenly everything went black. When Anna woke, she was lying on the ground outside the church, gasping for breath. Her heart was pounding in her chest, and her mind was spinning with confusion. How had she gotten out of the church? Where was Lily? The sound of footsteps behind her made Anna turn. It was Lily, but she looked different. Her face was pale, her eyes wide and vacant. "Lily?" Anna whispered, but her friend didn't respond. She just stood there, staring blankly ahead. And then Anna noticed the same symbols that had been carved into the walls of the church were now etched into Lily's skin, glowing faintly in the moonlight. Before Anna could say another word, Lily turned and began to walk toward the church, her movements stiff and unnatural. "Lily, no." Anna shouted, but it was too late. Her friend vanished into the darkness, leaving Anna standing alone in the eerie silence. The school trip ended in chaos. The teachers searched the area, but they couldn't find any trace of the students who had gone missing. The authorities were called, and a full investigation was launched, but the church and its grounds were deemed too dangerous to enter. No one ever spoke of the events that occurred that day, and life in Westbridge went on as if nothing had happened. But Anna knew the truth. The church was cursed, and the dark force that resided there would not let anyone leave without paying the price. As for Lily, no one ever saw her again. But sometimes, on quiet nights, Anna could still hear her voice, faintly whispering from the shadows of the old church, calling her to join her in the dark. The mystery of Shadow Lake. It was a cool autumn morning when the high school class of Greenwood Academy set out on their annual field trip to Shadow Lake. The lake was located deep in the forest, surrounded by towering trees and steep cliffs. Despite its serene beauty, Shadow Lake had always been shrouded in mystery. The locals had many strange tales about the place, stories of people who had ventured too close to the water and never returned. But for the students of Greenwood Academy, it was just another adventure. Among the group was Alex, a shy and introverted student, and his best friend Emma. They had been inseparable since childhood, sharing a deep bond that had only grown stronger over the years. Emma, unlike Alex, was always full of energy and loved exploring new places. She was the first to suggest they venture beyond the designated path and see what secrets the lake might hold. "Come on, Alex," Emma said, grinning. "Let's make this trip interesting. Everyone else will stick to the usual route, but we'll find something no one else has seen." Alex hesitated, feeling the weight of the strange atmosphere surrounding the lake. He had heard the rumors the lake was said to be cursed, its waters dark and treacherous. But Emma's excitement was contagious, and despite his reservations, Alex agreed. The class was led by Mr. Thompson, their teacher, a stern man who took his responsibilities very seriously. He warned everyone to stay together and not to wander off. "Stay on the marked paths," he said, "and avoid the water. The lake has been known to claim the unwary." The group made their way to the shore, where the lake stretched out before them like a vast, dark mirror. The surface was perfectly still, reflecting the cloudy sky above, and the surrounding trees seemed to lean toward the water, as though watching it. "Isn't it beautiful?" Emma whispered, her eyes sparkling. Alex, however, couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. He had always felt uneasy around the lake, as if it held some deep, ancient secret. But Emma was already pulling him toward the trees, eager to explore. They left the group behind and followed a narrow, overgrown trail that led deeper into the forest. The path was barely visible, obscured by fallen leaves and thick underbrush. As they walked, the air grew colder, and a sense of dread began to settle over Alex. He couldn't explain it, but the deeper they ventured, the more he felt like they were being watched. "Are you sure this is a good idea?" Alex asked, his voice trembling slightly. "Maybe we should go back." Emma paused and looked at him with a playful smile. "Don't be such a scaredy cat, Alex. There's nothing to worry about. We're just going to see what's hidden behind those cliffs." But as they rounded a bend in the path, the lake came into view once more, though it was much farther off now. The water seemed darker than before, almost black in some places, and the air around it was thick with an eerie mist. "Something's wrong," Alex said, his voice barely a whisper. "This place feels off." Emma didn't seem to hear him. She was too focused on the view ahead. "Look at that," she said, pointing to something on the far side of the lake. "There's a boat. It looks abandoned." Alex's heart skipped a beat. He hadn't seen the boat before, and it didn't look like any of the boats the group had brought with them. It was a small, weathered rowboat, sitting motionless on the water's edge. The sight of it sent a chill down his spine. "We should go back," Alex insisted, his voice urgent now. But Emma was already walking toward the boat, her curiosity getting the better of her. "Come on, Alex, let's just take a quick look." Reluctantly, Alex followed her. The closer they got to the boat, the more oppressive the silence became. The only sound was the crunch of dry leaves beneath their feet. The boat looked even stranger up close. Its paint was peeling, and the wooden planks were rotting. But it wasn't just the boat that unsettled Alex. It was the feeling that the lake itself was alive. as if something in its depths was watching them. "Emma, we need to leave," Alex pleaded, his anxiety growing. Emma, however, was already reaching for the boat's rope. She untied it, and the boat drifted silently out into the lake, as if it were being pulled by some invisible force. Then, without warning, the water rippled. "Did you see that?" Alex gasped, his heart pounding in his chest. "Something's in the water." Emma looked around, her expression confused. "It's just the wind," she said, but Alex wasn't so sure. The water wasn't moving in any natural way. It was as if something beneath the surface was stirring, creating waves without any visible cause. Suddenly, a dark shape surfaced in the water. It was large and shadowy, its form almost impossible to make out. Alex's breath caught in his throat as the shape moved closer, and the air seemed to grow even colder. "Emma, we need to get out of here," Alex shouted, his fear finally overwhelming him. Emma turned to him, her face pale. "What is that?" she whispered, her voice barely audible. Before Alex could answer, the shape surged forward, sending a massive wave crashing into the shore. The boat was violently tossed into the air, and both of them were thrown backward onto the ground. As they scrambled to their feet, Alex glanced back at the water. The shape was gone, but the lake was no longer calm. The water was churning, as if something unseen was moving beneath the surface just out of reach. "Let's go now," Alex yelled, grabbing Emma's arm. Together they ran back along the trail, the sound of the water's violent movement echoing in their ears. The path seemed longer now, as though the forest itself was conspiring to keep them from escaping. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, they emerged from the trees and found their classmates waiting near the shore. Mr. Thompson was scanning the lake, his face tense. "Where did you two go?" he asked sternly, though there was an edge of worry in his voice. "You're lucky we didn't leave without you." Alex and Emma exchanged a look, both of them shaken. Neither of them spoke of what had happened by the lake, but the memory of that dark shape stayed with them, lingering in their minds long after they left the forest behind. The field trip ended without incident, but the mystery of Shadow Lake remained unsolved. No one ever discovered who or what had been lurking beneath the surface. And as the years passed, the story faded from memory, as so many strange tales do. But for Alex and Emma, the lake would always be a reminder of the darkness that lay hidden in the depths, waiting for the next unwary soul to wander too close. The House on the Hill of the Dead. The town of Black Hollow had always been a place of mystery. Nestled in a valley surrounded by thick forests and steep hills, it was a place where few strangers ever dared to visit. The locals spoke of strange happenings and whispered about the old house on the hill, a decaying mansion that had stood empty for as long as anyone could remember. They said it was cursed, that the land it stood on was haunted by the restless spirits of the past. It was late in the fall when a group of friends from the nearby city decided to visit Black Hollow for the weekend. They had heard the stories about the house on the hill, and although they didn't believe in such things, the idea of exploring an abandoned mansion seemed like an exciting adventure. The group consisted of Sarah, a bold and adventurous girl, her boyfriend Jake, who was skeptical of anything supernatural, and their friends, Mark and Emily, who were both eager to see the famous house for themselves. As they drove through the winding roads that led to Black Hollow, the town looked as eerie as the stories had described. The houses were old, their windows boarded up, and the trees seemed to loom over the roads like silent sentinels. When they arrived at the base of the hill, they parked their car and began to hike up the overgrown path that led to the house. The air was thick with the scent of wet earth and decaying leaves, and the sound of their footsteps seemed unnaturally loud in the quiet of the woods. As they approached the mansion, it became clear that the rumors were true. The house was enormous, with broken windows, a sagging roof, and a crumbling facade. The front door hung crookedly on its hinges, and the once grand staircase that led up to it was now little more than a rotting ruin. "This place is incredible," Sarah said, her voice filled with excitement. "Can you believe no one's lived here for so long?" Jake, however, wasn't so sure. "It's definitely creepy. Let's just get in and out quickly. We don't want to stick around here after dark." Mark and Emily agreed, and they all made their way into the house. The interior was just as decayed as the exterior. Dust covered every surface, and the furniture was shattered and broken. The air was thick with mildew and the smell of decay. The floor creaked under their feet, and strange noises echoed through the empty halls. "This place gives me the chills," Emily said, her voice barely a whisper. "It feels like it's alive." "Don't be such a baby," Mark replied, though he didn't look very comfortable himself. They wandered through the house, exploring the rooms and the dark hallways, trying to ignore the growing sense of unease that seemed to cling to the place. In one of the rooms, they found old photographs yellowed with age of people they didn't recognize. Some of the pictures showed the house in its prime, when it had been a grand estate, but others were darker images of people with hollow eyes, staring out from the frames with expressions of fear. Jake, trying to lighten the mood, joked, "I'm pretty sure these people are all just long gone, and their ghosts are probably just bored." But as they moved deeper into the house, the temperature dropped. Sarah pulled her jacket tighter around her shoulders, shivering from the cold. The others noticed it too. The temperature seemed to fluctuate unnaturally, and there was an odd, oppressive feeling in the air, like the house was holding its breath. The group eventually found themselves in the basement, the stairs creaking under their weight as they descended into the darkness. The air was thick down here, and the smell of earth and rot was overwhelming. There was a strange feeling of weight, as though the very foundation of the house was pressing down on them. "There's something down here," Mark said, his voice shaky as he pointed to a corner of the basement. There, hidden in the shadows, was a large wooden chest. "Let's open it," Sarah said, her curiosity piqued. "Who knows what treasures we'll find?" Jake hesitated, but Sarah had already approached the chest and opened it. Inside there was a pile of old, rotting clothes, and beneath them, something glimmered in the dim light. Sarah reached in and pulled out a small, ornate box. It was covered in strange symbols, and as soon as she touched it, a chill ran through her body. "What the hell is this?" she muttered. At that moment, a sound echoed through the basement. It was faint at first, a whispering, like the wind brushing against the walls. But then the whispers grew louder, more distinct, until they became voices. Low and guttural, the voices seemed to be speaking in a language none of them could understand. "Did you hear that?" Emily asked, her voice trembling with fear. "Yeah, I did," Jake replied, his eyes wide. "Let's get out of here, now." But as they turned to leave, the door to the basement slammed shut with a deafening bang. The room was plunged into darkness, and the air grew heavy, as if something was closing in on them. Panic set in as the group fumbled to find a way out. They tried the door, but it wouldn't budge. The whispers grew louder, now accompanied by the sound of footsteps, slow and deliberate, moving around them in the dark. "We're trapped," Mark yelled, his voice rising in fear. Suddenly, the whispers stopped. An eerie silence fell over the group, and then in the absolute stillness they heard the sound of a child's laughter, echoing from the far corner of the basement. "Get away from me," Sarah screamed, dropping the box and stumbling back. The laughter grew louder, and the temperature dropped even further. The basement was now freezing, the cold seeping into their bones. The group bolted for the door, throwing themselves against it in a desperate attempt to escape. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, the door burst open, and they tumbled out into the yard. Breathing heavily, they ran down the hill, not daring to look back at the house. As they reached the bottom, they turned to see the mansion standing in the distance, its silhouette outlined against the moonlit sky. The windows were dark, but it felt as though something was watching them, waiting. The group never spoke of what happened that night, but the house on the hill remained a dark memory, a place of terror they would never forget. It was said that the house had been built on land that was cursed, a burial ground for those who had died in strange and violent ways. The restless spirits of the dead still lingered there, trapped in the house, waiting for the next unsuspecting visitors to stumble upon their dark secrets. The mansion remained abandoned, and though it continued to decay over time, the whispers never ceased. They said that if you listened closely enough, you could hear the voices calling to you, drawing you in just as it had done with Sarah, Jake, Mark, and Emily. And if you were brave enough to return, you might find that the house was never truly empty. There were always those who never left. The Call of the Abyss. It had been an ordinary evening when Emily and her friends Sam, Jake, and Lily decided to go on a hike in the mountains. The plan was simple, a short trek up the cliffs to enjoy the view and catch up on life. They had done this hike dozens of times before, but tonight would be different. The weather was clear, the air crisp, and the moon hung high in the sky, casting an eerie glow over the landscape. The path they took was familiar, winding through dense trees and rocky outcroppings, but tonight it felt different. Something in the air seemed to hum with energy, and the forest, though quiet, felt as if it were watching them. "This place always gives me the creeps," Sam muttered as they made their way deeper into the woods. "I swear, every time we come here, it feels like we're being followed." "Oh, stop being so dramatic," Emily replied, rolling her eyes. "It's just in your head." But even as she said it, she couldn't shake the unease that had begun to settle in her chest. The forest felt alive, the shadows deeper, the silence heavier. As they continued on the trail, the trees grew thicker, blocking out most of the moonlight. The only sound was the crunch of their footsteps on the dry leaves beneath them. They came to a clearing, where the trees opened up to reveal a jagged cliff face, its edges worn smooth by years of wind and rain. The group stopped to catch their breath and take in the view. In the distance, the town lights twinkled far below, but the mountain was silent, its vastness imposing. "This is the perfect spot," Lily said, pulling out a blanket to sit on. "Let's relax for a while." The others agreed, and they sat down, talking and laughing, trying to shake off the strange feeling that had begun to creep into the edges of their minds. Emily, however, couldn't help but feel a pull towards the edge of the cliff. There was something about it that called to her, a voice just beneath the surface of her thoughts, whispering her name. Without realizing it, Emily stood up and walked toward the edge. The wind was cold, and the sky was now a deep indigo, the stars shimmering overhead. The ground beneath her feet felt unstable, as if the cliff was waiting to collapse. "Emily." Sam's voice called out from behind her. "Where are you going?" She stopped, feeling disoriented. She hadn't meant to walk that far, but it was as if something had been pulling her. The feeling grew stronger the closer she got to the edge. The voice inside her head whispered again, urging her to step closer, to look into the abyss. Emily looked down, and what she saw made her heart stop. The cliff dropped away into a vast, endless blackness. There was no bottom, just a swirling darkness that seemed to stretch into infinity. The wind howled around her, and she felt the pull, like the very earth was reaching up to claim her. "Emily, stop," Jake shouted, his voice filled with panic. But it was too late. The pull was overwhelming, and Emily took another step forward. Her foot slipped on the loose rocks, and before she could regain her balance, she was falling. The darkness consumed her, and the world around her disappeared. There was no sound, no sensation, just the void. Emily awoke with a start, gasping for air. Her heart pounded in her chest as she sat up, disoriented. For a moment she thought she was still falling, but then she realized she was lying on solid ground. She was no longer at the edge of the cliff. She was in a different place, a place that felt ancient and wrong. The air was thick with a foul stench, and the ground beneath her was cold and damp. She looked around and saw that she was in a cavern, the walls slick with moisture. The faint light from above barely illuminated the cavern's vastness, but there was something else, something she could sense in the darkness, something watching her. "Emily." Sam's voice echoed through the cavern, distant and faint. She could barely hear him, but the urgency in his tone made her stomach churn. "Emily, where are you?" Jake's voice was next, followed by Lily's frantic calling. But Emily couldn't answer. Her voice was gone, replaced by the strange, low hum that filled the air. It was coming from deep within the cavern, a sound that vibrated through her bones and made her feel sick. She stood up, feeling unsteady on her feet, and began to move deeper into the cave, compelled by the sound, as if it were guiding her. The walls of the cavern seemed to pulse, alive with some dark energy. The further she walked, the darker and colder it became. The air grew heavier, and the hum became louder, until it was all she could hear. It filled her mind, drowning out all thought, until there was nothing but the call. As she walked, she began to see shapes moving in the shadows. They were tall, thin figures, their faces hidden in darkness. They didn't speak, but she could feel their presence, as if they were waiting for her to come closer. "Emily," a voice whispered, but it wasn't her name. It was something older, deeper, a language she didn't understand. It was the voice of the abyss, the voice of whatever ancient force lived here. She stumbled forward, her legs weak, her vision blurred. The cave was closing in on her, and the figures were getting closer, their long, skeletal hands reaching out. The hum grew louder, becoming a deafening roar in her ears. She couldn't escape it, couldn't resist it. Her body moved against her will, as if something else was controlling her. And then, as she reached the center of the cavern, the ground beneath her gave way. She fell, plunging into the endless darkness once again. This time, she didn't awaken. The others searched for hours, but Emily was never found. They called her name, shouting into the darkness, but there was no response. They couldn't even find the place where she had fallen, as if the very land had swallowed her up, erasing all trace of her existence. Years passed, and the story of Emily's disappearance became another legend, another warning. The mountain and its cavern were avoided, and the sound of the hum could still be heard on certain nights, a reminder of the call of the abyss. And sometimes, if you listened closely enough, you could hear a faint whisper on the wind, Emily's voice, lost in the darkness, still calling out to those who dared to listen. Did these stories send chills down your spine? If you enjoyed them and want to hear more, don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe to our channel. Your support helps us bring you even more terrifying tales. And here's a challenge for you. If we reach 1,000 subscribers, we'll start posting these spine-tingling stories even more often. So share this video with your friends who love a good scare, and let us know in the comments which story haunted you the most. Until next time, stay safe and beware of the shadows.